Okay, hello and welcome to our new podcast series, Close to Home, The Killers Among Us. Today we have myself, Avery.
Sarah?
Brenton.
Yeah, and so this new Studio 151 podcast series will involve the coverage and discussion of cases from our host hometown states. So I'm from Texas.
I'm from Oklahoma.
And I'm from Arkansas.
Yeah, so this project will be episodic style as we cover different true crime events or bizarre circumstances that have quite literally occurred close to home. For today's episode, we will be discussing the tragic murders that occurred at Camp Scott in Tulsa, Oklahoma on June 13th of 1977. Some disclaimers before we get into the case. We may reference themes of sexual violence and assault, bodily injury and death to a child, and the sexual assault of a child. So if you're not comfortable listening to any of these topics right now, I urge you to not listen to this episode and just take care of yourself. We hope to have you listen in to a different episode in the future that's maybe a little more appropriate for you. But with that said, we'll go ahead and start with a general overview of the case by Brenton.
Yeah, so as Avery said, we're discussing the Girl Scout murders that took place at Camp Scott. Just some, like I said, general overview. The murders took place on June 13th, 1977 at Camp Scott, which is in Mays County. There was three young girls aged 8 through 12, or 8 through 10, should I say, that were raped and murdered. And they found their bodies about 150 yards away from their tent that was set up, which we'll get into later about their tents, towards like the camp showers. This case was kind of solved, they said. They pinned someone for the murders, which was Gene Leroy Hart, who had history of violence and rape. And he's actually, I didn't know this, he was a jail escapee at that time. They were trying to find him, so it was like, well, I think we got the guy. But he was acquitted not too long ago, or not too longer after that, in March 1979. But they found just last year that DNA testing, which is inconclusive, connected him to the case, even though he was acquitted, but the case is still unsolved. So there's still a lot of question marks. There was also some information that was found out like a lot later that a couple camp counselors during their on-site training, one of the counselors' like belongings was ransacked. And they had a box of donuts, which I found interesting. But inside that box, they found a note that read, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent 1." And for some reason, they treated that as like a joke. They just thought they weren't serious about it, which we'll definitely get into that. That's very strange. But essentially, what else was found out? That most of the tents held about 4 girls, but this tent was just 3. So this is why it's very strange. It's very specific, and that's my overview of that.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the victims themselves, because I think it's important to note that there are people behind these crimes. You know, and when consuming and being interested in true crime content, we really have to recognize that these were human beings, these were their lives, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So the first place I'm going to start is with Lori Lee Farmer. So Lori Lee Farmer was born on June 18th in 1968 in Little Rock, Arkansas. She was the daughter of Dr. Charles Bowe Farmer and Sherry Farmer. Shortly before Lori's death, she and her family had moved from Arkansas to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Charles was the emergency room director at Tulsa St. John's Medical Center, and Sherry was a stay-at-home mother for their 5 children, with Lori being the eldest child. So Sherry described her daughter as smart, strong, and loving. She was very mature for her age, having just finished the 4th grade by the time they were living in Tulsa, and she was said to be a great, caring older sister. Sherry also recalled Lori's excitement and joy when a new addition to the family was born, and that also she was just this quintessential oldest child and that she took care of everyone. Lori was also a very bright and intelligent young girl. Her father expressed that she was an exceptional child and extremely bright. He even recalled a few examples during the trial, such as when Lori was 16 months old, that she perfectly recited the Pledge of Allegiance one morning at the breakfast table. And by the age of 2, she was also doing 100-piece jigsaw puzzles, that's just so cute, imagining that. And by 2nd grade, she had scored an IQ of 130, which I don't know much about IQ testing, but that's pretty high, I think.
That's pretty high.
Yeah, for a 2nd grader. And so this actually allowed her to skip 2nd grade. So she tested at the mental age of a 10-year-old, so she was able to skip a grade. And leading up to the camping trip, Lori was very excited to be a Girl Scout and meet new friends. She didn't seem too bothered or scared that she would be the youngest attendee. She was very much looking forward to the camp. It would be the first time she had ever attended a Girl Scout summer camp, but she asked her mom just before her 9th birthday if she could go. And initially, Lori had trouble deciding between attending Camp Scott or attending a different camp sponsored by the YMCA in Tulsa. Sherry had decided for her daughter, which she would say that she regretted for the rest of her life. Just before Lori left, the family recall hugging their young daughter and telling her that they loved her. At this moment, the parents' only real concern was that there was a long bus ride about 45 minutes from their house to the camp. Camp Scott was about 45 minutes away, like I said, from their home in suburban Tulsa. They had watched Lori as she climbed onto the bus, not knowing that this was the last time they would see her. When arriving at camp, Lori was very eager to make friends, and she wrote home to her family. In a letter she wrote on her first night, she had told her loved ones about her 2 new roommates, and I actually have that letter, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. Dear Mom and Dad and Misty and Joe and Chad and Kathy, we're just getting ready to go to bed. It's 7:45. We're at the beginning of a storm and having a lot of fun. I've met 2 new friends, Michelle Gus, or is that how we're pronouncing that?
I guess we can go with that for now.
Yeah, and Denise Milner. I'm sharing a tent with them. It started to rain on the way back from dinner. We're sleeping on cots. I couldn't wait to write. We're all writing letters now, because there's really nothing else to do. With love, Lori. And I feel like you can just get a lot of her it seems bubbly and just nice personality from that. Lori Lee Farmer was the youngest of the 3 victims. She was only 8 years old. Lori was buried, and the following is on her grave. Our precious daughter, sister, and granddaughter, who for 9 years gave us so much love, joy, and happiness and beauty, will live in our hearts forever. So now I'm going to talk a bit about another girl, Doris Denise Milner. So Doris Denise Milner, she was born on February 5th in 1967 to Walter and Betty Milner. At the time of the case, Betty was a lab technician at a Tulsa hospital. So from a young age, Denise was an incredibly intelligent and friendly young girl. At the age of only 4, she had taught herself how to read and write. Her mother also recalls that anytime she had a question about anything, she would just go to the library to look it up. Denise was also a straight A student, and she had recently been admitted into a Tulsa school that's for academically advanced students. She was only 10 years old. Do you guys know what a magnet program is?
Mm-mm.
So the school that she got into, it's called Carver Middle School. It was a part of a magnet program. So I actually grew up, when I was in middle school, I was in a magnet program. It's just they usually have more advanced classes for gifted and talented kids. And I know that in some districts that the schools will vary on specialty. So I actually went to one where the focus was technology. I don't know if it was the same here in Tulsa, but I just think it's very a wonderful accomplishment for her to be accepted into the magnet program. So I just wanted to note that. But outside of academics and intelligence, she had an arrangement of different hobbies. She enjoyed skating, gymnastics, and tap dancing. She was really well-rounded and just such a bright child. Her mother had also said that she had lots of interests and was good at most things she tried, and that she was this child that just wanted to do everything. And so Denise was also described as extremely friendly and compassionate. Her mother kind of described her as somewhat of a social butterfly. Like, she just seemed to make friends wherever she went. She was just such a joyous personality that people wanted to be around her. Betty Milner also had described Denise as a loving older sister for her little sister, Kathleen, and that she'd kind of play the role of mom sometimes. She would cook breakfast for her sister when her mom had gone to work. And I also read that she enjoyed watching TV and playing with Kathleen, which is just like very wholesome. And so Denise was originally very excited to attend the camp. She had sold enough Girl Scout cookies to be able to go for her first time. She was kind of anxious, though, about being away from her 5-year-old little sister and her mom. But She was also just excited to go because she was expecting certain friends to be there. At the last moment, though, these friends pulled out, and so she started getting a little more anxious and expressing doubts about going. When it was time to actually leave and get on the bus, she had started crying, and her mom just said, "Come on, like, give the camp a chance, and if you don't like it, just call home and we'll come get you." And that's what I think most parents would do in that situation. They would want to encourage their child to try to go have fun. She couldn't have known, like, what was going to happen. But anyways, at camp, she also wrote a letter. And I believe it's at the same time that Lori and Michelle also wrote their letters. I think they were all, like, in their tent writing letters that night before bed. So I'll read her letter. Dear Mom, I don't like camp. It's awful. The first day it rained. I have 3 new friends named Glinda, Lori, and Michelle. Michelle and Lori are my roommates. Mom, I don't want to stay at camp for 2 weeks. I want to come home and see Cassie and everybody. Your loving child, Denise Miller. I love the way she signed it. Your loving child, Denise Miller. It just sounds, it's kind of formal, but it's very cute. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Michelle. So Michelle Heather Goose, which I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, was born on the 22nd of July in 1967 in Miami, Oklahoma. Michelle was just 9 years old, and she was born to parents Richard and George Ann Goose, former residents of DeKalb. I don't know if that's in Oklahoma. But at the time of the case, the family, they were living in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a suburb of Tulsa. Our host, Sarah, is actually from Broken Arrow, too. Characteristics, she was described as being a very athletic young girl. She was pretty active and enjoyed a lot of outdoor activities. She was also a little shy, though. But although she was shy, she was so intelligent. She made straight A's. And some of her interests, she liked to play outside, being active, as I mentioned. And she also really liked plants, which I think that's just so cute. African violets were one of her favorites. And when deciding to attend the camp, she asked her mother, George Ann, to make sure that she took care of the plants and watered them while she was away. So Michelle was able to attend for similar reasons to Denise. She had sold enough Girl Scout cookies. She had attended the camp the previous year, and so she was excited to return. So she was the only girl out of the group that had been to the camp before. George Ann recalled Michelle running down excitedly to sit on her lap and tell her that she would miss her while she was away. Michelle's father, Richard, remembered feeling like something was kind of off when they said goodbye to Michelle that day she would go for the camp. He said that she huffed us goodbye. It was like she was saying goodbye and she was never going to see us again. I will also read Michelle's letter that was written that night. Dear Aunt Karen, how are you? I am fine. I am writing from camp. We can't go outside because it is storming. Me and my tent mates are in the last tent in our unit. My tent mates are Denise Milner and Lori Farmer. My room is in shades of purple. Love, Michelle. And so I think at this point, would y'all like to maybe talk about the family, or should we save that for after? Because it was mostly like advocacy work. So should you go and discuss our killer?
Yeah, maybe we should discuss it after, because
Okay.
there are things that happened in the aftermath that could tie in with that.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, that was so beautifully done. You did that really well. But yeah, it is so important to not forget that these people were actually humans, and this really did affect many people. So it is so important to bring the humanity back into victims of horrific crimes. But anyway, so I will be kind of presenting a little bit about the main suspect, Jean Leroy Hart, and there's a lot to get into, so we're going to dive right in. Okay, so Jean Leroy Hart was born November 27th of 1943, and he was raised near Camp Scott. He was a member of the Cherokee Nation. He lived with his mother, and he was known for his athletic abilities in football, and shortly after he graduated high school, he had a child and got married, but they did get divorced. So the Girl Scout murders were not his first kind of criminal activities, alleged criminal activities. In 1966, at the age of 22 years old, he kidnapped and raped 2 pregnant women, ages 18 and 19, from the parking lot of a nightclub in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. So he drove them deep into the woods, where he raped and sodomized them and left them for dead, which One of the some of the things in this case kind of will sort of maybe tie in as kind of like some circumstantial evidence into the Girl Scout murders, but what the women did mention whenever they were talking about this case is that while he was driving, he would keep one of them in the trunk and one of them up front in the car with him, and he would try on their eyeglasses to test their prescription to see if it was right for him because he had very bad eyesight. Which, just remember this for later on because there are some eyeglasses found at the scene of the Girl Scout murders. As well as that, when the women described Hart as being incoherent and that he made strange growling noises whenever he was assaulting them. So that can also be something to keep in mind because that is something that will tie in later. Anyway, so they were bound and gagged with nylon rope and duct tape, but they were able to free themselves and get to the police and identify him, which is good. But after that, he was sentenced to 3 10-year prison terms to be served concurrently, but he got out on parole after 28 months. So during this time, during his parole, he didn't stop his criminal activity. Basically, he started burglarizing homes, and I think this was a pretty short spree, like a week long maybe. But the first 3 burglaries weren't reported. These, I think where I read somewhere is that one of the people almost thought they just lost their wallet or, so it wasn't as obvious what had happened. But they all happened within like 24 hours of each other. And on his 4th burglary, he robbed the home of a Tulsa police officer and was caught by her at night. She was up, she heard him, I guess asked him to identify himself, and they were able to catch him.
Not a smart target.
I know.
He tried to rob a police officer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that had to be a mistake.
Yeah, I don't think he was, he already, he did what he did prior, so I don't think he was a man of reason. Anyway, so upon finding him in his vehicle, they found evidence of his past burglaries, which is how they were able to kind of identify that, and he was convicted of all 4. So because he was out on parole, he was served with 300 years of prison time about for the burglary, the rape and kidnapping, and as well as he was out on parole. So a lot to unpack. That is his history basically before. Okay, so during his time, as he's starting to serve his 300 years basically, he escapes jail. So he's also a jail escapee. So he was sent to Mays County court for his past crimes with the women. And in 1973 he escaped, but he was quickly captured. But then he escaped again, and he was able to escape by sawing through the bars to his cell window.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where did he get a saw from?
I don't know. He was in his home county, so, and he did have a lot of support from people in his home county, so it could have been maybe something like that. I don't know. But that's all alleged. I have no idea. Anyway, but at this time, it's said that he escaped with another inmate. I think his name was Larry Dry. And Larry Dry, he was apprehended later by the authorities, and he kind of told them a little bit about what they had been doing and how life had been out on the lam, basically. And this is relevant for later because this kind of will come up. So he talked about how whenever they were trying to move around at night and not be seen, they would get a flashlight and tape either a bag or a newspaper over it and then poke a hole to have just one little beam of light going through so that they can move around without kind of being seen. So this is something to remember for the Girl Scout murders as well. He also revealed that Hart had very bad eyesight, so he would always steal glasses. Another thing to remember. Anyway, so he was on the run until 1978, 1 year after the Girl Scout murders. So that's kind of, okay, that is actually all of the kind of background. But before I go into kind of his situation with the Girl Scout murders, I'm going to kind of set the scene of the things that have been happening at Camp Scott prior to the terrible events of that night. I know that you guys mentioned some of it, but there had been a lot of things that should have raised a ton of red flags. 2 months before the murders, during a training session, a counselor's tent was ransacked, which you did mention, and a note was left inside an empty donut box, reading, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent 1," which is odd because most tents did house 4 girls. It was 4 girls per tent. But it was viewed as a prank because the note also contained stuff about Martians, so they thought it was some sort of crazy person or like prank or something. I don't know, but that still should have raised a lot of red flags. Um, as well as this, I only read this in one place, so I'm not entirely certain if this is true, but allegedly they also found an effigy of a man that had been created, which was hung from a tree by its neck. So kind of some alarming things at what's supposed to be like a camp for little girls. As well as that, there was also kind of burglaries and like a slashed tent flap, and people were on the campsite that were not the counselors, clearly. So those were kind of those things that were happening. As well as I want to talk about kind of on the night of some of the strange things that happened and were heard as well. So just to preface, Tent 8, which is the tent that the girls were staying in, was the furthest from the counselor's tent. And it had an obstructed view. I think you mentioned the showers were obstructing its view, so it was very isolated compared to the other tents, and it also was storming. So it was kind of like a really bad combination for being able to see what was happening, and to hear as well. And as well as that, the tents weren't very secure. Like they're not like, because I've been to summer camp. I don't know if you guys have. They're not like your modern day like actual cabin with a door that can close and lock. They were kind of on like a wooden platform, and then they were just regular tents with a flap that anyone could get in and open. So very low security, which I think it's just a shame, because like I think that would have really deterred someone from doing this if it would have been more secure. But yeah, so other than that, at around 1:30 a.m., counselors heard some really strange noises, like low guttural sounds, something between a growl or a moan coming from the woods. And specifically, an 18-year-old counselor named Carla Wilhite had gotten up. She was kind of telling some girls to go to sleep because they were giggling and making noise, and it was pretty late. And she thought it was an animal. She thought the sounds were kind of maybe animal sounds. So when she walked toward the noise and kind of shined her flashlight at it, it stopped. But as she walked back, it started again. And rightfully so, this really frightened her. And she kind of thought, oh, if this is an animal, I don't want it to pounce on me. I don't want to be attacked, type of thing. So she just went back to bed, which I understand that maybe she should have done more, but I can also understand like who would have really thought.
And she was 18.
Yeah, she was. That's fairly young.
Barely adult.
Yeah. Anyway, so one of the other things that happened was at around 3 a.m., other girls heard a scream around the area where tent 8 was, as well as someone crying for like mama, mama as well. And I think I also read somewhere that girls, and I think it was tent 7, sometime at night, somebody opened their flap and shined a really bright flashlight in, and they thought they saw a silhouette of a man, and then whoever it was closed it. So there was also that as well. A lot of weird things were happening, a lot of strange noises. But I think I was watching a documentary about these cases. I think one of the big things is that the counselors were used to this. They were mostly people or former Girl Scouts that were kind of going back to council, and they were used to the dark. They were like, oh, whenever you go to Camp Scott, you just gotta be ready for it to be dark and kind of spooky. So they weren't, I think they just took it as like, oh, my mind's playing tricks on me, or oh, that's just this or that. But anyway, so those were kind of some of the weird happenings that happened that night. And now I think we can get into the morning of. So only one day into the camp, this is really sad. At 6 a.m., the counselor, Carla Wilhite, which she was the one that had gotten up to inspect the noises, she found the girls' bodies stuffed in their sleeping bags and scattered throughout the woods. And then, she was in a panic. They evacuated the campers promptly, and there was some evidence found, which I will kind of get into that as well. Um, so near 10-8, they found a single boot print, which was a size 9.5. But keep in mind, Hart's shoe size was size 11, so it was a little bit smaller than his. As well, they found pre-sewn gags with nylon rope and duct tape, which keep in mind that Hart did use that on. So kind of some parallels, really. That's kind of one of the reasons why they suspected him in the first place. There were a lot of like coincidences that just seemed too coincidental. As well, they found I think it was like a broken pair of glasses, which then again he had a weird thing about stealing glasses. And they also found a red flashlight covered with tape with a single pinhole to let out minimal light, which, as I told you guys before, that is what the alleged roommate, or not roommate, sorry, prisoner.
Tent 7.
Huh?
Oh, wait. He had a what? I'm sorry.
A red flashlight.
A red flashlight. And so is this probably the flashlight that the girls in tent 7 think they saw?
This could have been, but it was like dampened. It was like dimmed. To make it to where they wouldn't easily be able to see.
Okay.
So this is kind of like what Larry Dry had talked about, that he and Jean Leroy Hart had kind of done to move around without being seen at night. So just like kind of really odd circumstantial stuff. As well as this, there was a fingerprint found on the flashlight lens, but it was too smudged to be identified. As well as this, they combed like the entire area. Authorities did. And in the mountains overlooking Camp Scott, they found some caves, like a cave system that would have not really been very obvious to just people just, not very familiar with the area. But in these caves, they found some very unusual items. So in one of them, they found red underwear and a picture of 2 women, which this is interesting because this wedding photo was recognized by a police officer from a part-time job that he had as a wedding photographer. And as part of a prison photography course, he had the prisoners develop these photos, and Hart had helped develop them. So this was directly kind of linked to him as well there. Along with that wedding, it looked like it was from a wedding photo. Along with the photo, there was a pair of sunglasses that belonged to a Camp Scott counselor, which is another glasses thing, as well as a newspaper, which matched some newspaper found inside the red flashlight that had been used to kind of fill a loose connection with the batteries. And to note, this cave was also within walking distance from Hart's mother's home. And then another cave was found around 1 mile from the camp, and a prisoner that I don't know if I read his name, but he told the police of its existence, and he claimed he met Hart there after the murders, and a message was found written in the cave wall saying 77/6/17, which is the date, and the killer was here. Bye bye, fools. So a lot of crazy evidence that was found. And then now I'm going to go kind of into how this was tied into Hart. So there was all this circumstantial stuff. He was out on lam. He was from the area. And he was kind of a suspect from near the beginning because, the nylon cord and the black tape kind of mirrored what was used on the girls. As well, there were other suspects that were considered alongside him, but they were all rumored to have ties with him. So it was kind of in connection. They really had a strong feeling that he was related to this in some way. So they had a 10-month long manhunt for him. And they combed through everything. This is when they found the caves and all this evidence. But on April 6th, 1978, they found Hart hiding about 50 miles east of Camp Scott with a friend who was convinced of his innocence. And so during the trial, this is what kind of the consensus was that Hart seemed to be favored by the public. He was part of the Cherokees, and they really believed that this was racial profiling and that they were just trying to find a scapegoat. And that's kind of how they viewed this. And so they really stood behind him, very aggressively supporting him to the point where the victims' families needed police escorts to go to the courthouse. Because they held this in Mays County, which was his home county. And they also believed that because of Hart's previous escapes from the Mays County jail, that the sheriff had a personal vendetta against him. So there were kind of some questions of, are they trying to just pin this on someone? And is he just a easy person to pin it on, right? So some of the evidence that was shown was some of the things I mentioned to you guys earlier, but also they had tested some sperm that was found on a pillowcase, and that this sperm, it was inconclusive, but that it could not exclude Hart's DNA. And this is kind of a theme throughout this case. And although there was strong evidence against Hart, the defense made a pretty, a compelling enough case to the jury. And some of their defense included that the footprint was too small to be Hart's, the footprint I mentioned, as well as the fingerprint on the flashlight did not match his fingerprints, that the DNA swabs were inconclusive, and that they also claimed that this had to be motivated by racial factors. So on March 30th, 1979, Hart is acquitted after only a 6-hour-long jury deliberation. After that, he was sent back to jail because he still had his about 308-year sentence related to the rapes and the kidnappings and burglaries. But only 2 months after he is sent back to jail, on June 4th, 1979, he dies at the age of 35 of a heart attack. While in prison. So he had previously that day kind of spent an hour lifting weights and jogging around the prison exercise yard, and then he had his heart attack. So so that's kind of the information about him. So I don't know if you guys wanted to kind of go more into maybe aftermath details and stuff like that.
Maybe we can first, if y'all have like any comments on what we've talked about so far, because there's so much detail and, like you're saying, coincidences. I mean, the first thing that's coming mind to me is, like you said, it's all kind of added up. He kind of has this behavioral profile of what he does when he commits crimes, and the fact that that's consistent. And it shows that the fact that he is a repeated offender and keeps escaping shows that it's likely that he would try to commit a crime again. So, but what are y'all thoughts so far?
Yeah, I mean, just hearing some of the stuff, you say that, like, he had a lot of support behind him, that, like, there's no way, and stuff like that. They're just trying to pin it on him and stuff. It's just crazy, like, seeing that. Because he's, like you said, he's an escaped convict. He's done it twice. He's like has all these like things that were to his previous crimes, like these glasses that he like always wants to find, this flashlight that is just like custom made, we'll say, and that was all found near the campsite. I don't know. It's just all wild. Like, I mean, like hearing especially like all this information that you talk about, that is. It's just wild to me. Like,
yeah, their main thing was that the DNA results were inconclusive, so they didn't have concrete evidence, and so that was kind of the main thing.
Yeah, and that's when we get into modern DNA testing, where was it a match for his, or they just realized they still couldn't rule him out?
I have some information on that.
You want to go into that?
Okay. So yeah, I can go into that. Yeah. So they did some further testing over the years. In 1989, they tested the pillowcase, and they got a partial profile of the DNA. It was inconclusive, but they could not exclude Hart, and they did exclude some other suspects that they had, though. And then in 2022, very recent, so in 2022, they did another DNA testing. And although officially inconclusive, it strongly suggested Hart's involvement in the murders, while eliminating several other potential suspects. So his DNA could once again not be eliminated after all of these rounds. And I don't know if they will do more DNA testing. It's kind of seeming unlikely, but that's kind of how that has gone over the years.
It's interesting if you're people listening, if you're an active, what's the word? Just like viewer or listener of true crime content or just like these real horrific events, you know that these cases that happened in the past are often like re-brought up, especially if they're an unsolved case, because of modern DNA testing and how proficient we have become since previously. It's really interesting. You see a lot of cases that were previously unsolved becoming solved, and while this one is still considered unsolved, and we do have to say that, it's seems very likely that we know who our culprit is.
Yeah, definitely. And there was a statement by Sheriff Mike Reed of Mays County after the 2022 DNA testing update. Sheriff Mike Reed of Mays County said that unless something new comes up, something brought to light we are not aware of, I am convinced where I'm sitting of Hart's guilt and involvement in this case. So, Sheriff was pretty convinced. Yeah. So, what are you guys' thoughts?
I want to like I don't know if you said it, like that's why I want to ask, like, when was the second time he escaped? Like, what year was it? Like,
I think it was also 1973. Like, it happened fairly soon after he got.
Okay, yeah. So, because of course this murders took place in 1977, so that's why I was just thinking, like, what timeline was it after he escaped that second time and he actually got to, not be captured like so soon after, like how far, like it could these crimes could have took place and stuff. So yeah, I feel that a lot of these, even though a lot of this evidence is like inconclusive, that it's wild that as technology has come about, that it can be tested more, and even though they can't exactly 100% we got this guy, that they're gonna like talk about it and keep bringing it up. So
yeah, and I mean the fact that they can't rule him out, and then this mountain of is it called substantial? Is that the
I think it's to
term?
be circumstantial.
Circumstantial. Yeah. So I mean it's a pretty large amount of circumstantial evidence, and then plus the fact that modern technology, although they can't say it's him, they still can't rule him out because, like you said, they were able to rule out so many other suspects. That's alarming. And then to me, something that just doesn't sit right is the fact that his mother's house was somewhat nearby in the area, because I would imagine if you were a prison escapee, there's only probably so many places, so many allies where you're going to be able to stay and not rat you out. And I would imagine maybe his mother might be one of those people. We didn't really research the mother much.
I don't think there was a lot of information, just that he had a lot of supporters in kind of like the Cherokee group, and that they did believe that he was innocent, and that he was a victim of racial profiling. So yeah, I think he also, another thing to note is, since he grew up there, he probably knew the area very well. And that's kind of the thing with like the caves. It's like these are caves that would have been overlooked normally. So I think kind of also his knowledge of maybe the area is kind of raises some questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking all of that into account, we also maybe could talk about the family now, because pretty much all of the parents of the three girls were 100% convinced that that was their man. There was no other explanation, and to this day they still believe that it was him. And part of like the complexity there, just to note real quick, is the issue of double jeopardy. Even if the DNA today in 2022 had confirmed, like 100% matched that DNA was his, there's kind of the issues with, well, he can't be tried again because he was already tried and acquitted. And I've seen some other cases where this has happened, and one way that police were able to find a loophole is that this, in this case, this suspect was actually in the military, so they were able to try him twice because they tried him with the military court as well. And so in this case, I mean, if the DNA did 100% match him, I'm not exactly sure what could have been done, because, for one thing, he's dead, he's deceased, and for two, the double jeopardy. But I guess it just kind of speaks to some flaws in our justice system, which kind of brings us to our next topic of conversation, which is the family, because many of the girls' parents went on to be advocates for victims and their families. So me and Sarah both did some research on this topic. And so something that I looked up is Michelle Goose's father, Richard Goose. He helped to establish the Victim Bill of Rights in Oklahoma, as well as the Oklahoma Victims Compensation Board. He had felt that he and his wife were ignored by law enforcement and prosecutors, and so this drafted bill is intended to help keep victims and families involved in every step of the legal process. And also something to note, part of this disappointment with law enforcement and just the treatment of this case is partly because whenever the girls were found dead, murdered, it was evident that it was a murder. That morning, when the parents were alerted, they were just told that their children had died. There was no mention of foul play at all. They were most likely trying to cover themselves, the Girl Scout Camp Scott.
Yeah, and it was very evident that they had died from like bludgeoning and strangulation. So it's so
absolutely. And then the other part of this bill that I mentioned is that it helps victims and their family members with money to assist any medical bills. Another thing to mention, Lori Farmer's mother, Sherry Farmer, she founded the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children. This organization provides assistance and support to families of homicide victims. And then her husband, Dr. Bo Farmer, he continues to work at, or it says he continues to work at St. John's Medical Center. And Sherry, so she was a stay-at-home mother. That's why she was able to get involved in so much advocacy for victims' rights. And so she played a part in that role. And then I believe they also helped the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation in the Mayor's County Sheriff's Office, as well as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So, after this event, they continue to be very active in advocacy and raising support, raising awareness for this. Nonetheless, while raising 4 children, because Lori was the oldest of 5. So I just think that's a big testament to them. Yeah, did you write anything for the other parents or any other information?
No, I found basically what you found. But yeah, it's like very admirable that after this that they were kind of able to advocate for others out there that might have similar situations and really try to make changes.
Absolutely, though. And then something that I didn't know, so while some of the parents were a little more active in like the actual politics of it, nonetheless, they were pretty much all involved just in just raising awareness around this issue and really pressuring law enforcement to have the manhunt whenever he was... What is his name? I'm so sorry.
Gene Leroy Hart.
Gene Leroy Hart. That's a long name. Whenever he was on the run. So they kind of really helped organize that and just put pressure on law enforcement. And yeah, and I know some of them, including Michelle's father. No, it was Michelle's mother, I think, that went on to be and speak in some documentaries regarding the cases, just, again, to continue to advocate and raise awareness around this issue. And then another thing that I noted that, this was such a big, horrific crime, even though it was the 70s and this was just happening in the 70s, just these horrific slasher crimes were taking place. But, these were 3 young girls, and so this really did shake the Tulsa community. I have written down that Cheryl Stokes, a friend and neighbor and classmate of Lori Lee Farmer, she felt that Lori's death really affected her. And actually later in life, she would go on to work for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And so that organization has contributed to the ability to retest a lot of the DNA in like just several cases over the years. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have for that. So do you have anything? You said no.
No. Yeah, I've basically gone through all my information, which was a lot. So definitely a lot of details to this case.
This kind of opens like our commentary portion of this case, where we're just kind of going to discuss some controversies or just any discrepancies or opinions that we have about this case. So we can start, or do you have anything you'd want to start with, or we could discuss the documentary series with Kristen Chenoweth?
I just kind of want to, like, for the listeners out there that, of course, this story is about like three young girls that, no matter who it is, like someone to be brutally murdered like this and even raped is a very sensitive thing. Um, as you had described in your portion earlier, that a lot of these girls, like, they had aspirations for life. This is a camp where they're supposed to like all come together, like kind of have a fun summer to really like be themselves. You said one girl was like a very 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 intelligent for her age, being able to skip a grade. That I don't know. It just like hearing this just kind of like it sits really wrong.
Yeah.
To really hear all this, and I just that's basically my part to say, but it's just tough. It really is.
Absolutely, and they were all very intelligent and had goals and so much that they had so much potential to do in life. And it's sad because I wish Denise had the chance to change her opinion about the camp, because we know that she wasn't having a very good time at first. She was never given the opportunity to actually enjoy the camp and turn that around. But yeah, it's very tragic, and like he said, Brenton said, it's a sensitive subject, which is part of the controversy surrounding Kristen Chenoweth in the documentary. I think it's Keeper of the Ashes, which recounts the case, and Kristen Chenoweth discusses kind of her own personal tie to the tragedy, and we were discussing how it just kind of comes off as a little, no, not even a little, it comes off as tone deaf. She was actually a member of the same troop in Oklahoma at the time. And so she was supposed to attend the summer camp, but she got sick and had stayed home. And so I have this quote that she had said, let's see. This is a story I wish I never had to tell. It haunts me every day, but this story needs to be told, which I 100% agree with that. There's just kind of this implication in the documentary that Kristen kind of makes it sound like, oh, it could have been me, or, I got sick at last minute, I didn't have to go, I could have been more directly affected by this. And I don't know, do y'all have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I feel like that's not the right way to do it. There's something so off about that, a little bit tone deaf. It's just like, oh, it could have been me. Like, I could have gone and it could have been me. It's just, yeah, no. We need to focus on really, like, the victims and the story. Like, it's not, yeah. I felt like that's unnecessary. I don't know what you guys think.
And I think we should also like say that this, and I didn't know who this was before, but Kristen Chenoweth, like, she was like from Oklahoma, like she was from the area. So I guess in her defense, this isn't like someone like that was on the West Coast and like, oh, I picked up on the story, let me talk about it. Like, she was close by, but as we've all said, like, you kind of like putting yourself like, whew, man, I was close. Like, I was like, man, I really like was a couple minutes away from deciding, hey, I'm going to go to this camp. Like, she really could have just been one of the other girls evacuating from the area. Like, she wasn't going to be the one or whatever. But yeah, I kind of wanted to say that, yeah, I don't know. It's off.
Exactly, and especially because this documentary, at the end of the day, is supposed to be about the girls and preserving their memory, their legacy, and so we don't need it to be overshadowed by this little what anecdote, is that what it's called?
Anecdote.
Oh gosh, yeah, that of Kristen Chenoweth. And those listening, if you don't know who Kristen Chenoweth is, she is I would say she's a celebrity. She is most famous, I think, for her Broadway acting in Wicked. She played Glinda, so she's pretty well known in the public, and I think that's kind of what adds even more just like an icky feeling to this documentary, is that, with the power and influence that she has, I feel like she could have just spotlighted the story without needing to insert herself into it.
Yeah, she didn't have to. It could have been like, this is in an area I was from, and and that could have been how she tied it in. But
yeah, and to be fair and to have a nuanced opinion, the documentary, some of the victims' families were in the documentary and talked about it. So I do think it's good that they had the opportunity to discuss and advocate over everything that happened. But outside of that, we just do feel that there's a little controversy to be had. And then another thing to know that I'm actually trying to research as we're talking right now is that someone else tried to make a movie, or not a, like, the other one was a documentary. Someone tried to make a movie called Candles about the tragedy at Camp Scott in 1977. And it just seems really, really odd because, let's see. The person that is writing it, I think his name is Russell. He's naming that this other potential suspect by the name of, let's see, Carl Lee Myers, that he was the killer. It seems really weird and odd that, someone would want to create a movie about this real tragedy, and not to say that this hasn't happened before. We know that Hollywood is known for kind of taking these serious cases or just real life stories in general and trying to make a great movie about it, but especially if it's not done in the right way, it falls very tone deaf. We keep using that term,
Yeah.
but I can't think of another term.
Especially to twist it as someone else was the murderer too. Like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that tied the main suspect, and so yeah, that's just a little strange. That's all I gotta say. But yeah, I do think, just going back to the Kristen Chenoweth thing, I do think it's sort of nitpicky to be like, oh, she's tone deaf and this and that. But I do think, that these types of things needed to be held handled very sensitively,
Mm-hmm.
and that we shouldn't dramatize these just terrible, tragic things that happen, and kind of like make some sort of like monetization off of them, because it's at the end of the day, it's real people, it's real things that happened, and it's just very tragic. So I think that was.
Yeah, there's a line between raising awareness, advocacy, discussing stuff for more, let's just say, good ill intention versus creating content for, I guess, the sake of creating content and making money off of it, or bringing some sort of publicity to your name because you're talking about like a quote unquote hot or interesting topic. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think another important thing just with the true crime community in general is that we make sure that we are not giving attention to the killer or suspect, because a lot of these times, not always, but some of these homicides, the killer really takes a twisted sense of pride in his actions and what he committed. And, no, we're not we're not doing that. Absolutely not. And this doesn't necessarily fully apply to this case, but there are just tons of cases out there where these killers, they were these aspiring serial killers and they really wanted to get some sort of fame. And I feel like it's really our fault as a society, kind of what we have turned some of these horrible crimes in real life circumstances into. Like the Ted Bundy, we've seen so many recreations and films and whatnot of him, a real person, not a character. And I know one of the examples, I think Zac Efron may have played him in a film, and then people were just so stuck on how attractive Zac Efron is versus the reality and the purpose in sharing these stories, which is absolutely not to crush on an actor who's playing a killer. So, I mean, there's just a lot of problematic issues, I think, within the true crime community, and that's something that we should talk about and just be aware of.
Yeah, it's so important to not dehumanize it. It's actual people, actual things that happened, and yeah, there is some kind of like desensitization because true crime is a lot more widely talked about now, I feel. And there's so many documentaries and shows and podcasts, including this one. So, it's important to remember that, these things are very serious, and yeah.
And I guess another thing to note, since this crime is still considered unsolved if you have any information that, of course, to go to law enforcement, go to the police. In the future, I would imagine we'll probably cover even more unsolved cases because, Sarah's from Oklahoma, and that is, I believe, the state with like the largest numbers of cold cases and unsolved cases.
Really?
Or around. I might be wrong. Maybe in the
Hmm.
South at least. I've just heard that Oklahoma is very well known for having a lot of unsolved cases. So just like I said, if you see something suspicious, if you have a gut intuition, report it, say something. But this might wrap up our conversation unless you guys have any last comments.
Nothing from me.
Yeah, I think we got a lot out and we said what we needed to say.
Okay, well, I guess other than that, I guess one last thing to say is that Camp Scott was closed down after this event. So locals apparently will tell you it's haunted. But like I said, the camp has never been reopened. Apparently some from this article, brave explorers. Okay, we'll check out the grounds today. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about with the whole desensitization thing.
And for
But
the next episode, we're visiting. I'm just kidding.
oh goodness,
It is 45 minutes away from here, so no. We're not gonna go. We're not gonna go, but like,
please don't go.
Dang.
Let's not do that. But thank you for listening. In our next episode, we will either be covering a case from Texas or Arkansas, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, just thank you for being here and listening to us, and take care of yourself, please. Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye.